Well, first of all, I think that domestic violence should not be tolerated in any form. And education is one of the areas that I think will help lower the levels of domestic violence in our society. I think we could start with the parents, and I feel if we bring up our children in the right way, teach boys how to treat girls, teach girls to know that they must not accept any form of violence from boys, and if we teach them in the right way, even in the home, I feel that that will help in a big way. Also, I would like to say that women should not be ashamed if they are victims of domestic violence. Just by telling someone else might save their life.
Violence against women is unacceptable in any form or fashion. Some people think that when you talk about domestic violence or violence against women, we're only talking about physical violence. But there is psychological, there is emotional violence, there is economic violence. There are various ways that women are put under stress, tension, and abused in more ways than one. And none of these can be acceptable in our society. From a ministry standpoint, the Ministry of the People and Social Development, we believe that the family is most critical, and I think developing the family is the first place to start, because in there we have to teach our young men how to find ways to solve problems, to communicate, to understand themselves in the world, so that they don't feel they have to use violence to take advantage of people. And at the same time, we teach our women to respect themselves, to respect the men, and to find ways that they themselves can improve and manage themselves so that they don't have to depend on men for their substance or sustenance. In addition, our society on the whole must enact laws, and not only enact laws, but we must enforce these laws so that people understand that there's a consequence to their actions and that our society does not condone these type of behaviors. All in all, we want to produce a space and an environment where everybody can find it a meaningful place to live. That is Trinidad and Tobago.
There is nothing more abhorrent than violence to women and girls. Indeed, statistics reveal that it is a very alarming situation where 1 in every 3 is abused, cursed into sex, or beaten during their lifetime. For us, eradicating violence against women and girls is a priority. And as a government, we will take every step we can, whether it be through legislation or in collaboration with the NGOs, to work towards this end of eliminating violence to women and girls, to work towards eradicating equality of gender and, of course, gender violence. I will continue to champion the rights of women and girls. And in this regard, as I say, we'll partner with all those who are willing to work with us.
I think violence against women should not be tolerated in any form or format, and with particular reference to domestic violence. Domestic violence, people believe sometimes that because you marry someone or you live with someone, that person owns you. They don't own you. A marriage is a merger. It's a merger of two parties, and as such, both parties must learn to respect each other. And as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and nationals of the CARICOM, we should actually look at being our brothers and sisters keepers. We follow what the UN Secretary General had said with ring the bell. We don't go around ringing the bells, but knock on your door, call. You may give that person a chance to get away. You may give the person who is rendering that violence time to think about it and stop. Remember, violence in any form is not acceptable. And as a government, we will seek to ensure that there are policies in place to protect our women, to let them understand that reporting such violence is not going to be detrimental to them, to let them realize that the government cares for them, and we will help them get through this. You don't have to put up with domestic violence.
I believe that violence against women is deep-seated in a psychological bondage that the abuser exerts over the victim. And many a woman has fallen a victim to such abusive relationships. Women need to be strong. They need to become educated. They need to find ways and means of becoming financially independent, to becoming independent thinkers and critical thinkers, so they do not have to depend on anyone for their livelihood, and that in such a way they can make well-informed decisions about their lives and their future and the future of their children. I would like to see the government implement strategies and programs to assist women to become educated, particularly women who have not had the benefit of formal secondary education.
Whenever I hear about this business of this crime of domestic abuse, domestic violence, I instinctively think of my children. They are in fact adult children, and I think of all the young adults out there, and most important, the life choices that they're making. And this is the very beginning of possible cases of domestic abuse and domestic violence. It's the life choices, the persons whom they choose as their partners in life. And therefore, it is incumbent on us, on mothers, fathers, on legislators, that we give all, for the mothers and fathers, our love and support to these young adults, guidance, spiritual and otherwise, and ensuring, maybe they won't always want to hear from us, but ensuring that they do in fact choose proper life partners. This is a very heinous crime, and as legislators, I think it's incumbent on us in ensuring that the research is done and all the necessary legislation is in fact promoted and passed so that the perpetrators of this crime can be dealt with seriously, instantaneously, so that the effects are not felt to generations and generations beyond. I think it's incumbent on all of us, and we all have a part to play in keeping this down to a minimum or to perhaps not at all, this very heinous crime.
Women are the bedrock of the society, and in my own constituency, they are the movers and shakers. And so when women are affected by abuse and challenges in their home, it disrupts the family unit, and the family unit is really core to the community, to the country, to the well-being of children, the well-being of the family, the well-being of the society and the neighborhood, and therefore it is a very serious issue. We need to protect our women, our children. We need to protect the vulnerable in society, and we need to address these issues.
Well, being a young person, I would obviously stand strongly against violence against women. Approximately 70% of the female population internationally is faced by some form of violence, whether it be physical or sexual violence. And this figure is quite alarming in this day and age. And I think it is something that government certainly needs to play an active role in eliminating. Aside from policy framework, of course, I think the promotion of women in the arena of politics and, of course, in decision-making bodies is certainly one avenue by which this can be addressed. Trinidad and Tobago has certainly made strides in this arena. In fact, we have seen this year our first female Prime Minister and also many other ministers and members of Parliament being female. So I think the promotion of strong female role models to younger women certainly would help in the fight against women against violence. And of course, we also need to promote strong male role models for the younger generation, because it obviously takes a weak man to perform an act of violence against a woman. So I think it is important that we have strong male role models as well in our society in the fight against violence against women.
The mere fact that violence against women is such a problem in the world today, after so many years, it demands our attention and our action. Violence against women is more than a brutal act. It has deep psychological implications which make our women folk feel sometimes incompetent, abused, and it lowers their self-esteem. We have to recognize that violence against women is violence against society, because it has been said that the women folk are the custodians of life. They are the ones who are responsible for the transmission of culture. Whereas men lay the building blocks of civilization, it is women who cradle and nurture civilization. And therefore, an act or acts of violence against women is an act against civilized society. We need to come on board. We need to enlighten our people, because too many of these issues are hidden in the closet. And it is only by enlightenment and by exposing these issues that we would be in a position to respond against such a brutal and inhuman act.
God, in His infinite wisdom, created woman to be cherished, to be loved,
not to be abused. And I feel in particular in my ministry, the police officers, defense force officers, fire officers, they should themselves nurture the thought that women ought to be cherished, and in particular our policemen, when they come to the stations to report matters of abuse, they should be dealt with specially because they are women and they ought to be loved and cherished.
Violence against women impacts not only the victim, it impacts the entire family, it impacts communities. As parliamentarians, we can put legislation in place that would give protection to the woman who is the victim, to her children, and to the community at large.
Violence against women is a scourge we've got to eliminate. We've got to work hard to ensure that we bring about changes in our society so that we can eliminate it. Now, my ministry is the Ministry of Planning, Economic and Social Restructuring, and Gender Affairs. So, under Planning and Gender Affairs, we obviously are very concerned about the aspects of domestic violence and violence against women. There are many laws which really have to be amended to bring about a more equitable society. And we are also bringing about gender mainstreaming, which is not only within my ministry, but we are visiting every ministry in the country to ensure that when they are creating projects or policies, that they actually take into account the effect of these projects on gender, and we don't mean just women but men, because you understand that we have got to ensure that our society is equitable, and from that point of view we are looking at every single law that there is pertaining to family life to bring about positive change in the society.
Violence against women is a very cruel act. As far as I think, it is criminal. It is an act that has become so prevalent in society that you find a lot of people have accepted it and more or less turned a blind eye to the fact that a woman and her children are actually being abused. And for me, I would think that we need to ensure that women are supported. They are encouraged to be educated. They are encouraged to find employment. And as well as we need to ensure that they are supported, because what you find is that in domestic violence cases, most women don't want to leave unless they are sure they are supported. And even if they leave and they are not receiving the support, most of them tend to go back into the domestic violence situation. So what we need to do as a society is to ensure that we create greater opportunities for them. So it's important that we, try our best to ensure that we provide the systems or create the systems whereby we can support them and let them know that, we care.
I believe that violence against women is an abomination to the existence of the human being. But more so, I believe that violence against anybody is a total abomination. And I believe that as a government, education is the most important thing. We first of all have to find out what is the root cause of the increase in violence against women. And once we can find that, then we will be able to alleviate it in some way. Unless we do that, violence against a society, not just women, would continue. But I am against violence against women, and I'm against violence against anybody.
Violence at any time and of any type is reprehensible and totally unacceptable. And when it comes to violence perpetrated against defenseless and innocent persons, vulnerable persons, women and children, then it is an atrocity against society as a whole. As an independent senator, what I can do is to urge the government to tighten the legislation with respect to domestic violence, and importantly, to leave no stone unturned, and as a matter of priority, to put in the necessary infrastructure to shelter safely victims of abuse. I make this statement in the memory of all the victims of domestic violence and in the memory of Akil Chambers.
Ours is a constitution in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago that recognizes the concept of the right to security of the person and the right to equality of the treatment. These two fundamental human rights, guaranteed by the state to each and every citizen, acquires a new significance and special meaning when it comes to protection of the woman in our society. Many strides have been made towards uplifting women in our society. There have been many challenges that we have faced. Greater opportunities should be provided to women so that they can take their rightful and equal place in our society. I pledge as Attorney General that the legislative agenda of this government will ensure that women and the elimination of violence against women would be at the forefront of the legislative agenda of our Parliament, and laws will be enacted to protect women and children, and there shall be an end to violence against women.
Well, violence against women is something that should be totally condemned by all sectors of the society, and indeed violence against humanity, taking into consideration that we are supposed to be a God-fearing society, and I think that in all religious scriptures, violence against humanity is something that is totally abhorred. In relation to what government should do, I would focus on the issue of education and social dialogue, because this is a very sensitive issue, taking into consideration the increase in recent times of violence against women. And I think that education at all levels of the society, from the primary to the tertiary level, and also incorporating an outreach program into the religious domain and the non-governmental organization and so on, would help to shape social dialogue and, by extension, shape legislation to deal with this particular issue.
Violence in any way, it hurts and it pains. Violence across the board hurts and pains in every way. And I am saying that women should not condone violence in any way, in any form, in any fashion. And if it is called taboo, if it is called culture, if it is caused by religion, it should not be condoned in any way at all. Violence affects all of us across the board. It affects us globally. And I am saying that we as the government of Trinidad and Tobago is going to put everything in our efforts and power as regards eliminating and eradicating violence against women by way of educating our people, by getting our CBOs and NGOs involved to eradicate domestic violence.
Any act of domestic violence is degrading to the perpetrator and the victim, and is demoralizing to the victim, especially if the victim is the parent and their children in the household. The next generation is exposed to an environment which none of us should encourage, and it should be abhorred, and steps should be taken to have persons who are inclined to be violent towards their mates, spouses, or those under their care to think before they act. And with respect to how we can combat domestic violence, the state can introduce educational programs in the schools, even as far back as the primary level, so that young children can grow up learning to respect individuals who they will interact with later on as mates or spouses, as the case might be. And if we start in the primary schools, coming through the secondary schools, by the time the next generation in charge of the households, then domestic violence should be significantly ameliorated or become a thing of the past.
I'm very passionate about the issue. Violence is a scourge that affects everyone in our society, especially our beloved women, our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our wives. There's an obligation upon us, certainly the men amongst us, to be seen to be their protectors and supporters, and in some instances their servants, for those married men out there. The issue is a very serious one, and as a legislator, as a member of the Senate, the opportunity is there for us to improve the laws and structures of access for persons who are victims of violence. Violence is, of course, a very broad concept, and it isn't restricted to the physical aspects. Indeed, one could argue that the emotional aspects are perhaps worse than the physical aspects could be, because it is a torment that persists. It is certainly something that we must view with serious scorn, and that we must take our very best effort in seeing eradicated. There is a broad approach that we can encourage as legislators, not only in the laws which we fashion and which we promote, but in stimulating the social dialogue so that education as to the scourge that violence is had, and that we can mature as a society with a view to prevention being better than any cure ever.
I believe it's a question of re-socialization. It's a question of starting with our boys. Not enough has been done. We don't teach enough of how to treat women. Starting with a pregnant woman, how do we, as boys, how do we treat pregnant women, mothers, teachers, aunts, women in general? It's a question of respect. Where are the values? So we need to re-socialize. Certainly we have to start somewhere. Certainly we have to look at how we pass on our culture. What are the aspects of culture that we really hold dear? Violence is not a woman's thing. It's not only against women. When you are violent against a woman, you affect a mother. What's a mother's worth? What is the life of a mother? What is the life of a mother worth? Is it in dollars and cents? How do you look at generations of people and tell them that mothers are the target of violence? Maybe insignificant investment has been done to treat with this issue because it has probably been in economic terms and not in the social realities of fear and violence. And we certainly have to be less complacent. In fact, there's no room for complacency. There should be a zero tolerance for complacency when it comes to violence against anyone, but more so for women. Women are too vulnerable. We are the nurturers. And therefore, if you attack and you're violent against the nurturers, what you really have is a displacement of all in society. So, as a society, we need to look at it.
Let me say first of all that we know that this whole issue as it relates to the elimination of domestic violence, the 25th of November was customary, the day that we talk about it, we educate people. We know that 11 years ago the UN passed a resolution, the General Assembly, basically talking about the International Day for the Elimination of Domestic Violence against Women, and it's almost about 3 decades since the NGO movement has been celebrating that day, making people much more aware of it. It's really a scourge, it's one of the activities as a country, as a nation, as a world that we really can be proud about. What I would want to suggest is that we need to look really at speedier trials where you have women making applications for domestic violence. Trinidad has been fortunate. We have had the act since 1991. But at the same time, we really need to look at having much more safe houses so that women and children who are victims of domestic violence, that they know that there's some place that they can go to. We need to look a lot more at education, educating our men, educating our women, educating our children. We need to look particularly at training our police officers because the issue of domestic violence is an extremely sensitive issue. When people go to police stations or they go and make complaints, you really require a special type of training to be able to treat with that issue if it is that it's to be successful. It's not really a question of simply going to court and getting an order, because when we look at the data, it tells you that a lot of the women who actually succeed in getting a protection order are subsequently killed. So we have to look at it from a multifaceted approach, dealing with the issues at home, especially when you have unemployment and you have challenges now in terms of the economy. It means that families are going to be under a lot more stress. So clearly a lot more money has to be fueled into education, into family life, into the new family court that is there. And I think then and only then maybe the chances are that we're going to have a reduction in domestic violence.
I don't think that violence against women is something that a government can legislate against or easily resolve. I think that it is a phenomenon that points more significantly towards a lack of appreciation in our society about the value of women, and by extension the value of persons that are weaker than those that are doing the attacking. For example, children. And so I think a far greater appreciation has to be developed and nurtured in the home when it comes to women, children, the value that they bring to a household, to a community, and to a society. Without that deep appreciation for our differences, without a celebration of our diversity, even in a smaller unit as a household, I think that we're going to continue to have challenges. So if we want to address the problem of violence against women, I think a great place to start would be in the home and in the community. We explain to people, particularly our young men, that how to treat with disagreements, how to deal with emotional issues, challenges and strains until they can get their points across without using their fists.
Well, the issue of violence against women is one that affects everyone in our society because whether we are a man or a woman, as men we have mothers, daughters, sisters, wives, and co-workers, and therefore it's something that should concern us all. We need to address the whole issue of the culture of violence in our society. Unfortunately, our society has become one where violence is more and more the norm in dealing with conflicts, and that has to be changed. And certainly, in particular, violence against women, because our women, our children, the aged in our community are the most vulnerable. And if we treat the most vulnerable amongst us in a horrific way, then as a society as a whole, we cannot hold our heads up high and value ourselves as a nation. Measures would include, obviously, addressing it by way of law, but even more than just law, our own behavior, how we bring up our children, how we educate our sons and make them to understand that they must treat women with respect and with dignity at all times, how young girls are treated in schools and at home to demonstrate from very early on that they are not to be abused in any way whatsoever. The words that we use, the language with which we describe women, all of these things must change as we deal with the culture of violence, not only against women, but the culture of violence generally in our society.
I think Violence against women is a very terrible practice. I look at it as a heinous crime in that when you degrade a woman and you violate her, you harm the woman and you harm the family, and in turn you harm the society and the community. What can we do as parliamentarians to treat with this issue? I think we need to place the legislations and the matters that deal with violent crimes against women, place that as a priority. And we could also establish programs to fellowship with women and to mentor from women parliamentarians and women in leadership roles to the women in the community and the women in the grassroots, to help empower them and to help them take a bigger stance, a greater stance in life, in their homes and in the society.
Well, I think that domestic violence in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed in the world, is a most ugly situation which we have to condemn and which we must take the most significant measures to curtail or to eliminate. That's not an easy task, but it's something that we must all be committed to. In terms of the measures that we have to apply, one is increased legislation that will be a deterrent. But I think that in and of itself would not be sufficient. Enforcement is the key. And enforcement not only in terms of public sector enforcement and the use of the police, but more importantly, or should I say equally importantly, would be the use of the NGOs and the financing of the NGOs to ensure better surveillance of what is happening so that we can take preventive action rather than action at the end, which usually is a tragic situation which we are seeking not to correct but to establish sanctions against the person who is guilty.
Violence against women is something that should be decried by all civil society. You have different types of violence against women, rape, domestic violence, and so on. However, for us to understand violence against women, we must understand the psychological aspect of it, where women feel entrapped in a situation that they can't escape from. It's a type of mental enslavement. How can legislation help? Legislation can be two-pronged, but it may not eliminate violence against women. We can reduce it. We can make penalties harsher. But at the end of the day, I think we need enabling legislation, and we as legislators have a responsibility to provide a framework where women who are trapped in these situations can access help, counseling at the very earliest signs of violence against themselves, so that they can take themselves out of that cycle of dependency and violence for the sake of themselves and their children.
Final analysis, I believe that those who perpetrate violence against women are actually cowards. Cowards who must be seen in a light in which we create a new discipline for our society, in which we send a message it is not acceptable to perform acts of violence of any type against women. And As well, we need to ensure in our society that there are consequences for the actions of violence. Too often, Trinidad is seen as an indisciplined society when anything goes, and therefore we need, as a society, to ensure that people who perpetrate crime suffer the consequences of that action, as it were. Likewise, I think these cowards, if you like, are filled with self-hatred and anger, and we must deal with that as a society. We must get them to change their self-image.
According to the United Nations, violence against women constitutes a very fundamental breach of their fundamental human rights and poses a major impediment to achieving gender equality. It is unacceptable to not only the society and the community at large, but whether it occurs in the family, in the community, or even among strangers, whether it is in times of war or peace, that question of violence must be condemned. Therefore, we as parliamentarians must work collectively to promote greater awareness and heighten consciousness amongst the people. We must work collectively to promote good legislation that would have very stringent provisions to protect the rights and freedoms of our women. In that regard, it is our view that we must continue to strive towards a society in which there's equality for all, where there will be gender equality, where there will be genuine equality, peace, and sustainable development for all. Gender equality, where there will be genuine equality, peace, and sustainable development for all.